If you've ever believed that the law, such as the Sabbath, offerings, or purity regulations, only came into existence with Moses on Mount Sinai, you're not alone. Most modern theological systems, from Orthodox Judaism to traditional Christianity, assert that the law was the product of the Sinai covenant, a historical event that defined the boundary between humanity and God, between grace and punishment. But what if that's wrong? What if the law didn't begin at Sinai, but in Eden? What if the covenant wasn't just a phase in history, but a sacred rhythm established from the beginning, lived out by Adam, preserved by Noah, and faithfully passed on by Abraham? The Book of Jubilees, a text excluded from the canonical Bible but preserved in the Ethiopian tradition, makes a startling claim. God's law did not begin with Moses. It was given to Adam at the very beginning. Adam kept the Sabbath. Noah made offerings. Abraham observed all the commandments, even before the tablets bearing the 10 Commandments existed. What does that mean? It means that the concept of sin didn't begin when humans received the law, but rather when they deviated from a long-established sacred rhythm. And grace isn't a replacement for the law. It's the restoration of a life aligned with the covenant. If this is true, then every current theological framework regarding the fall, redemption, why God chose Israel, and the role of the Messiah must be reconsidered from an entirely different foundation. The law wasn't introduced to control a chosen nation. It was given to realign with a divine current that had been lost. And if the law existed beforehand, then perhaps breaking it isn't simply disobedience. It's the loss of the very spiritual identity that humanity was created with from the beginning. The real question is no longer, should I keep the law? But rather, am I living out of sync with a sacred rhythm I was born to walk in? If Adam kept the Sabbath, then what ground are you and I walking on? If Abraham observed the laws of purity, then is it possible that our modern faith has lost something deeper, something more primal, something we were never taught? Have you ever wondered why a book like Jubilees, one that doesn't encourage idolatry, doesn't deny God, doesn't preach heresy, was completely removed from the canonical Bible, while books like Enoch, with its bizarre imagery of fallen angels and hybrid giants, are still referenced and preserved in indirect traditions? Jubilees disappeared from synagogues, churches, and theological academies across the Western world for centuries. The real reason might send chills down your spine, not because Jubilees was wrong, but because it was too right, too orthodox, too early, too complete. And because of that, it wasn't just hard to accept. It was unacceptable to a theological system built on a different timeline. Jubilees not only establishes that God's law was given from the time of Genesis, it lays out a covenant system intertwined with a sacred calendar, holy festivals, and a spiritual order still observed by the angels in heaven. It doesn't just speak of humanity, it speaks of a cosmic rhythm to which both the heavenly hosts and mankind must align. What does that mean? It means if you are living out of sync with the Sabbath day, if you are celebrating the wrong feasts, you're not just theologically mistaken, you've fallen out of a sacred order, not intentionally, but still you're misaligned. And if this were widely taught, then all the reforms, councils, and confessions of the centuries that followed would have to be questioned. From the moment the law was given at Mount Sinai to when Jesus taught in the synagogues, everything would need to be re-examined through the lens that the law pre-existed. The covenant was established in Eden. And God didn't change his method of redemption. He was reminding us of what had been there from the beginning. That is why the Book of Jubilees was never publicly condemned. It wasn't burned. It wasn't labeled heretical. It was simply ignored, not copied, not taught, not mentioned. A removal not by protest, but by silence. A deliberate silence. Because sometimes the most frightening thing isn't a heresy. It's a truth that comes too early, one that forces the whole system to bow and look again. And that is never easy to accept. When you read the book of Genesis, everything seems clear. Heaven and earth are created. Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden. Cain kills Abel. Then comes Noah, the flood, the Tower of Babel, all told in a simple, concise, easy-to-remember tone. But then, when you open the book of Enoch, also about the pre-flood era, you encounter an entirely different world. Angels appointed to watch over humanity become captivated by earthly beauty, fall from their stations, create a hybrid race, the Nephilim, and teach mankind forbidden knowledge. A vivid, overwhelming picture, like a parallel universe to Genesis, yet describing the same point in time. And then there's another book, spoken of even less, but one that doesn't add fantastical scenes nor keeps Genesis's surface-level simplicity. That book is Jubilees. This work doesn't add imagery, it adds foundation. It declares that the entire story from Adam to Moses isn't a series of disconnected events, but a continuous flow of covenant, a sacred rhythm that God established from the beginning. And not only humanity, but even the angels in heaven are living according to that rhythm. Enoch tells of the fall of the Watchers, but Jubilees goes further. It doesn't just recount the event, it redefines its consequences. The Watchers weren't merely rebels driven by desire. They were beings who broke the sacred rhythm of the covenant. Genesis gives us the characters, but Jubilees gives us the reason. Why Adam had to keep the Sabbath, why Noah needed to offer sacrifices, why Abraham was chosen, not by chance, but because they were the ones who still kept the rhythm of the covenant in a world that had fallen out of sync. The difference between the three texts doesn't lie in the question of who's right or who added what, but rather in the perspective. Genesis is the surface account. Enoch is the supernatural response. And Jubilees is the foundation. It doesn't say many new things, but it restructures everything you thought you understood, and that alone is enough to leave the reader bewildered, yet unable to look away. Because perhaps these three records are not in conflict, but are three layers of memory, capturing a truth too deep to be told with just one voice. Have you ever considered that God's laws, like the Sabbath, the distinction between clean and unclean, or the offerings, weren't created solely for humans? According to the Book of Jubilees, these practices that seem to hold only social or moral meaning did not originate from the earth, but from heaven. Before Moses, before Israel, even before Adam's sin, the angels in heaven were already living within a legal order designed by the Creator. They kept the Sabbath, the sacred day of rest that marked the completion of creation. They distinguished between clean and unclean, not out of fear of impurity, but because this rhythm was how they honored the sacred. They offered gifts, not because God needed offerings, but because offering was a means of aligning the individual with a greater divine order. Jubilees pulls back the veil and reveals the law is not a tool to control behavior. It is the reflection of a sacred rhythm established from the beginning. Just as the stars follow their orbits and the seasons unfold without deviation, the law is the current that keeps the universe in harmony. And if the angels keep the law, then clearly the law is not a burden, but the original melody that all living beings are meant to hear and follow. Humanity, from Adam, was invited into that rhythm, not as a slave, but as a creature empowered to join in harmony with the angels. This turns the common understanding of law on its head, no longer as a boundary that restricts freedom. On the contrary, Jubilees shows it is precisely because humans bear the image of God that they are capable of entering into this divine order. Keeping the law is not a way to earn God's favor. It is the act of reclaiming a lost identity. When Adam kept the Sabbath, he wasn't merely following a rule, he was living according to his original design. When Abraham observed the laws of offering, he wasn't having a religious experience, he was realigning with a rhythm that originated in the heavens. And if this is true, the greater question becomes, am I willing to realign with the sacred rhythm, even the one that the angels themselves follow? This is no longer about dogma. It is a deep invitation from an order that your soul remembers, even if your mind has forgotten. If there is one seemingly harmless thing that could derail the entire covenant between humanity and God, it is time. Not a particular sinful act, not a war on morality, but a subtle misalignment from a sacred 364-day calendar to a lunar-based calendar like the one most of the world follows today. According to the Book of Jubilees, the year was designed to consist of exactly 364 days, divided evenly into 52 weeks, 4 seasons, and always beginning on the same day, Wednesday, the day God created light in Genesis. From that light, sacred time was established. Every festival, Sabbath, and covenant week revolves around that rhythm. But when humans altered the calendar, following the lunar cycle or astrological seasons, all sacred days began to fall out of their original placement. The issue is not merely forgetting the festivals, the issue is we're keeping them on the wrong days. A person may be faithful, sincere, but if the Sabbath is no longer within the flow God originally designed, could it be that they are living outside the covenant without even knowing it? The frightening part is, they're not rebelling on purpose. They're simply living within a calendar that has been replaced. Jubilees doesn't just warn, it laments. It repeats time and again. If people do not return to the correct number of days, 364, then the seasons will be off, the weeks misaligned, the holy days mistimed. And thus, the covenant, even if it still exists in theory, will become a contract with no valid date for enactment. A voided agreement, not because it was rejected, but because the time used to keep it was wrong. The theological question is, if you're living out of sync with the holy days, are you still within the sacred bond between heaven and earth? If the covenant is a melody, then being off by a few days is like playing the right music in the wrong tempo. You might keep the law, attend the feast, fast devoutly, but if you're doing all of it to the wrong rhythm, then is what you're keeping truly the covenant? The greatest concern isn't that we've lost faith. It's that we still believe, still practice, still worship, but we're doing it all on a distorted calendar. And that isn't just a technical error. It is a spiritual dissonance too deep to name. A fracture in the flow of the covenant, begun with a number that seems harmless, 365.25. If you once believed that the laws of God began at Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments on 2 stone tablets, then the Book of Jubilees will compel you to reconsider the entire sacred timeline. While much of modern theology sees the covenant as a historical progression beginning with the people of Israel, Jubilees boldly claims the law, including the Sabbath, the offerings, and even circumcision, was already practiced long before Moses was born. Adam, the first man, kept the Sabbath during his very first week on earth. Not because he understood the law, but because he stepped into a pre-established order. When God rested on the seventh day, the entire universe was taught to rest. And Adam, as a reflection of the Creator, was likewise invited to keep that rest as part of his essence. Then came Noah, a man who lived in a generation so corrupt that God had to wipe out all humanity with a flood. But he wasn't just good or moral. According to Jubilees, Noah was intimately familiar with the holy festivals, knew how to make offerings in the right season, in the right way, even recorded and preserved the sacred days to pass on to his descendants. He wasn't just an individual who was saved, he was a guardian of the memory of a covenant established since Eden. And then Abraham, regarded as the father of faith. But what many overlook is that according to Jubilees, he didn't just believe, he lived the law. He practiced circumcision, not because Israel's legal code existed, but because he had heard the voice of the covenant. He kept the commandments, statutes, and ordinances, those same instructions that Moses would write down centuries later. But for Abraham, they were already a living reality. He wasn't forced to obey. He chose to walk in a sacred order that had echoed since the beginning. From Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, a sequence of people lived within the covenant without needing a formal religious institution, without stone tablets. Because the covenant, according to Jubilees, didn't begin with a nation. It was a sacred symphony resounding between heaven and earth. And those who lived by that rhythm were keeping the law, even if no law had yet been formally declared. This doesn't just change our understanding of religious history. It redefines the foundation of morality. That righteousness doesn't come from an institution, but from alignment with what is sacred and ancient. In the same trove discovered at Qumran, home to the most treasured ancient Jewish texts of the Second Temple period, both the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees were found, both written in ancient languages, breathing the atmosphere of traditions older than the finalized Bible. Both speak of angels, sacred order, the fall, and judgment. But something strange stands out. Enoch, though also non-canonical, is quoted in the New Testament, specifically in the Book of Jude. Meanwhile, Jubilees, despite its deep impact, has been met with near total silence in mainstream Christian tradition. Why? The answer doesn't lie in the quality of its content, but in how inconvenient it is to the theological system that emerged later. Enoch, with its metaphysical imagery, terrifying visions, fallen angels, and Nephilim, reads like ancient legend. It's impressive, stirs the imagination, and can easily be labeled supplemental revelation. But Jubilees is different. It doesn't just tell stories, it constructs a system. It redefines time with a 364-day calendar. It reframes the law, with commandments dating back to Adam. It repositions the covenant, not limited to Israel or the era of Moses, but as a divine pact stretching from the beginning across generations of mankind. Because it is too early, too complete, and too tightly woven, Jubilees becomes a book that's difficult to accept. Because to acknowledge Jubilees is to force every post-New Testament theology built on grace to answer a difficult question. If the law existed from Adam, why did salvation only come with Jesus? If the Sabbath was kept by angels, why did the Church shift the holy day to Sunday? If the covenant is a cosmic rhythm, not merely a Jewish legal code, then who is keeping that rhythm today? Enoch may be quoted because it testifies to God's holiness and justice in a supernatural realm, but Jubilees, because it reaches too deep into liturgy, calendar, and the moral foundation, is far harder to accept, not because it's wrong, but because it's too right, at a time when the theological world wasn't ready to hear it. And like every truth that arrives too early, it isn't condemned, but silenced. When we speak of calendars, people usually think of cold numbers, astronomical cycles, and systems for organizing agriculture, administration, or religious events. But according to Jubilees, time is not a neutral concept. It is a sacred flow, precisely designed by the Creator. The Book of Enoch details the movement of the sun, the heavenly gates through which light passes, and the orbit of the seasons. But Jubilees is the book that transforms those movements into a rhythm of life, a template for the covenant between heaven and earth. A year, according to Jubilees, is not 365 or 354 days like in modern calendars. It is 364 days, divided into 52 weeks, 4 seasons, each with 91 days, and each year always begins on the same day, Wednesday, the day God created light in Genesis. This is not arbitrary. Light is the beginning of order, and time is the frame that preserves that order. When light established the first day, the seasons, festivals, and Sabbaths were arranged precisely like notes in a symphony. But once the calendar is altered, even by a single day, the entire orchestra falls out of rhythm. The festivals no longer align with the seasons. The Sabbath drifts from the original flow of light, and humanity, no matter how faithful, ends up living to a rhythm different from God's. This is no longer an astronomical issue, it is a spiritual tragedy. A rupture between heaven and earth, not because of deliberate sin, but because of living out of sync with the sacred day established from the beginning. Jubilees doesn't merely present a number, it presents a warning. It repeats again and again that if people do not observe the correct number of days, 364, rituals will become confused, the covenant will lose its power, and the angels will no longer bear witness to the holiness of the community. Because time, from the original biblical perspective, is not something to measure. It is a sacred space where the covenant is enacted. And if you live on the wrong calendar, you're not just off schedule, you're living outside God's resonance. This may shake us to the core. How many centuries has humanity lived on the wrong calendar? How many generations have kept the feasts, attended the Sabbath, yet not on the day appointed by God? Perhaps we have not lost our faith, but we have lost the rhythm. And according to Jubilees, to be out of sync with the calendar is to be out of covenant. Not for lack of devotion, but for lack of alignment. Not because of betrayal, but because the sacred day has been forgotten. When the Watchers, those angels sent to watch over humanity, are mentioned, most popular texts, including the Book of Enoch, focus on one theme: the fall through lust. They saw the daughters of men were beautiful, desired them, united with them, and from that union came the Nephilim, the hybrid giants that disrupted the created order. But if that's where we stop, we've only scratched the surface. Jubilees doesn't use romantic or tragic language to describe the Watchers. It offers a sharp indictment. This was not an emotional fall. It was a deliberate act of rebellion, a replacement of the covenant with an alternative order. According to Jubilees, what the Watchers did wasn't just personal sin. They built a system. They taught humans metallurgy, to create weapons and kill one another. They introduced enchantments, beautification, tattoos, and the use of minerals to decorate the body, turning the body into an object of attraction instead of a sacred temple. They passed on astrology, celestial readings, separating light from the Creator, turning the cosmic order into a tool for control rather than worship. Step by step, they led humanity away from the rhythm of the covenant, not by force, but by knowledge. Not through coercion, but through indoctrination. This was no longer a fall in the emotional sense, it was a betrayal of structure, a theological coup. The Watchers didn't just do wrong, they redefined what was right based on their own standards. If the divine law is a rhythm set by God, then their actions were the writing of a new song, pulling humanity out of the holy cycle. And once the rhythm of life changes, there's no need to destroy the temple, no need to erase doctrine. The covenant is broken from within. That's why sin in Jubilees is not defined as individual acts. It is misalignment. It is living by a rhythm no longer in harmony with the heavenly realm. It is allowing the things we learn, however clever or seemingly advanced, to lead us away from the sacred. The story of the Watchers is no longer a tragedy of angels loving mortals. It becomes a warning that anyone, whether angel, human, or entire civilizations, who alters their rhythm from the divine structure, severs themselves from life. And that is the most frightening part. Not punishment, but dissonance. No longer hearing the sound of the covenant, and not even realizing how far you've drifted. Because to miss a single beat is to fall out of the eternal harmony of creation. In Genesis 26:5, there is a verse that has caused many Bible scholars to pause. Because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, my statutes, and my laws. The immediate question arises, what laws? Moses hadn't been born. Sinai was still ahead on the timeline. What laws did Abraham keep? In later Jewish and Christian tradition, this verse is often interpreted symbolically, referring to general obedience or faith. But the Book of Jubilees does not leave this vague. It gives us a detailed and astonishing account. According to Jubilees, Abraham kept the Sabbath on the correct day, according to the 364-day calendar, beginning on the Wednesday when God created light. He circumcised himself and his descendants on the 8th day, without delay, without hesitation. He refrained from consuming blood, avoided improperly butchered meat, and taught his household to live in ritual purity. He offered sacrifices at the correct seasons, at Passover, during the harvest, never deviating from the cycles kept by the angels in heaven. He followed the laws of marriage, avoided unions deemed impure, and lived according to laws concerning land, home, and inheritance, even though no stone tablets had yet been given on the mountain. Abraham, according to Jubilees, was not the founder of a new religion. He was the one who remembered something ancient, who lived again in a sacred rhythm forgotten by his generation. And because of that, he was not merely the forefather of Israel, but the guardian of the original covenant passed down from Eden through Enoch, Noah, and now to him. This causes us to reconsider the entire theological timeline later generations have constructed. If the law existed before Sinai, then Moses was not the first to receive it. He was the restorer of the law among a people who had forgotten. From this perspective, the promises made to Abraham are not just rewards for faith, but the continuation of a sacred order sustained through generations. What later theology assumed began with Moses was, in truth, only another chapter in a divine contract that had existed since the beginning. And if this is acknowledged, then all theology based on the division of before and after Sinai must be re-evaluated. Perhaps grace did not follow law, but law and grace walked together from the start, only disrupted when man fell out of the sacred rhythm. And Abraham is the proof that even in a dissonant world, there were still those walking in harmony. We often think of the covenant as a spiritual contract, a promise between humanity and God, sealed by faith, obedience, and at times, the blood of sacrifice. But when you read Jubilees, a different picture emerges, clearer, more specific, and cyclical. The covenant is not just faith, it is a calendar not made by man, but given from heaven. In Jubilees, everything about the covenant is tied to time. The first day of the new year, the seasons of offerings, the sacred weeks, the unwavering Sabbath. Each marker is not merely a date, it is a connection point between heaven and earth. Angels do not live vaguely. They keep the Sabbath on the exact day light was created. They offer sacrifices in the appointed week. They do not wait for inspiration to worship. They live in a preordained rhythm. And humanity, from Adam to Abraham, is invited into that very rhythm. This reveals a powerful truth. The covenant is not merely a matter of inner belief. It is not suspended in personal faith. It does not change with emotion or social convenience. It is concrete, etched into the cycles of the cosmos, and requires mankind to sync with those cycles. Thus, when one ignores the 364-day calendar, replacing it with a hybrid lunar solar system, or shifts the Sabbath to another day, this is not simply a cultural misstep. It is a departure from the covenant, not because God is angry, but because that lifestyle no longer resonates with the sacred rhythm. Like a musician playing off-beat in a symphony, though full of love for music, he no longer creates harmony. And when that dissonance continues across generations, people may believe they are living in faith, yet they have long since stepped outside the divine contract. Jubilees leaves no room for ambiguity. It describes each moment. The new year always begins on Wednesday, the day light was created. Each season has 91 days. Each week has precisely 7 days. And every holy feast is placed exactly where it belongs, like stars in the heavens. In that rhythm, mankind finds its place in the eternal realm. The covenant is no longer something to memorize. It is a living melody, inviting each soul to harmonize with the heavenly choir. And now the question is no longer whether you believe in the covenant. It is, are you living in sync with it? Because if the covenant is a calendar, then living by a different calendar means living outside the covenant. And if you have been out of sync, are you willing to return to the correct day, the right season, the true rhythm, to once again walk in that divine harmony? Sin, as commonly understood, is often reduced to violations, a wrong deed, a broken commandment, a transgression of a moral code. But the Book of Jubilees doesn't stop there. It expands that definition, shifting from behavior to rhythm. Sin, in the light of Jubilees, is not merely doing wrong, it is living out of rhythm. Someone who celebrates Passover on the wrong day, offers sacrifices in the wrong season, or observes the Sabbath on the wrong calendar, has not just disobeyed, they have fallen out of alignment with the covenant. Sin is no longer just personal fault, but total disconnection from the sacred structure established in the beginning. And the Watchers are the clearest evidence of this dissonance. They did not merely fall because they loved mortals, they passed on an entire system of knowledge, metallurgy, ornamentation, beautification, sorcery, astrology, sky signs. These things pulled mankind out of the simplicity and correctness of the original covenant. They created a new order, with its own rules, rituals, aesthetics, and calendar. And when humans followed them, lived by their system, that was when mankind began to slip out of sacred frequency. In Jubilees, you don't need to commit great evil to be considered wrong. Simply living in a different rhythm is enough to have stepped out of the sacred zone. Someone who eats meat with blood, keeps Sabbath by the moon, or sacrifices out of season is misaligned, out of the covenant frequency. And from that misalignment, consequences begin. Not because God punishes, but because the divine order no longer upholds that person. The concept of sin in Jubilees is not meant to induce fear, but to awaken. Its emphasis is not on retribution, but on lost connection. Sin is the loss of rhythm, the severing of frequency, the inability to hear the echo of heaven, even with the best intentions. And thus, returning to the covenant doesn't begin with sorrow. It begins with realignment, keeping the true Sabbath, eating in season, living by the 364-day calendar, offering at the appointed time. The awakening Jubilees calls for isn't about avoiding wrong, but about living right. It invites us to recalibrate our entire personal rhythm, to align with the Sacred One, like a mistuned instrument that must be retuned to blend with the symphony of the cosmos. And when that happens, sin is no longer a burden. It becomes an invitation to return to the first rhythm of life. In many ancient texts, the Watchers, those angels sent to oversee humanity, are often described as having fallen because they were captivated by earthly beauty. But the Book of Jubilees delivers a different indictment. They didn't just love wrongly, they lived wrongly. They didn't just fall, they broke the law. Not man's law, not merely moral law, but the sacred law established from the beginning, embedded in the structure of the universe. The Watchers presumptuously taught mankind knowledge not meant for them at that time: sorcery, astrology, metallurgy, cosmetics, weapons crafting. What seemed like civilization in the light of Jubilees was the introduction of a foreign rhythm corrupting the purity of creation. Their betrayal didn't stop at personal acts. They constructed a substitute for the covenant, a counterfeit order, where rituals, aesthetics, technologies, and humanity's very perception of the universe were all reshaped in a different direction. This is what made them more dangerous than anything else. They didn't just do wrong, they led an entire generation into dissonance with the divine frequency. Not just through temptation, but by attempting to establish a parallel world far from God's covenant. And the consequence? Jubilees is clear. The Great Flood was not just God's wrath, it was a cosmic reset. When the structure of creation drifts too far off course, the only remedy is a restart. Not because God refused forgiveness, but because a misaligned system left unchecked would multiply as a foreign species in the spiritual realm. Humanity was wiped out, but so were the formulas, the knowledge systems, the lifestyles the Watchers had seeded into the earth. The waters washed away, not just flesh, but civilizations that had fallen out of the covenant. Jubilees compels us to re-evaluate the concept of judgment in Scripture. It is not emotional punishment, it is the self-defense mechanism of the sacred covenant. When something strays too far from the original frequency, it is either corrected or it is erased. The Watchers were imprisoned, their offspring, the Nephilim, were destroyed, and humanity was saved only if someone still lived in rhythm: Noah. One man who kept the seasons, the festivals, the law, was preserved so that the covenant would not vanish entirely. What is truly terrifying is not the punishment, but the fact that when you live out of rhythm long enough, you no longer hear the call of the covenant. And at that moment, it's not that the covenant has left you, it's that you've stepped outside its circle without even realizing it. The Watchers serve as a sobering warning. Deviation didn't begin with blatant sin, but with a subtly altered rhythm of life that gradually unraveled the entire divine order. For centuries, we've been taught to view the Great Flood as a symbol of divine wrath, a storm of fury meant to punish humanity for its sins. But when read through the lens of Jubilees by someone seeking the sacred rhythm, a different perspective begins to emerge. This wasn't merely judgment, it was restoration, a divine effort to re-establish a covenant so distorted it could no longer be recognized. Not silent rage, but holy grief over a world that had lost its beat. And the only way to save what remained was to begin again. Noah, in the light of Jubilees, was not just a moral man. He was one who was retaught the correct calendar, the appointed feasts, the divine laws, so that he could become the keeper of the covenant's memory for all humankind. When the angels warned him of the flood, they didn't just hand him blueprints for an ark. They restored to him the original rhythm, the 364-day calendar, the proper Sabbath, and the heavenly aligned sacrificial seasons. Noah didn't just save humanity, he rescued the sacred rhythm that had been broken. His ark was not merely a vessel, it was a memory capsule, carrying the frequency and promise the covenant needed in order to be reborn. Jubilees reveals that if the Watchers sowed distortion, then the flood was heaven's instrument to wipe that design from the earth. But not to destroy everything, to restart with one man who could still hear the sound from heaven. And the mystery is this: in the midst of judgment, God chose mercy, not annihilation, but purification, not extinction, but rebirth. The covenant wasn't severed, it was grafted into a single, unbroken branch. This view invites us to reflect. Could it be that the crises in our lives, personal or communal, are not endings, but invitations to return to the sacred rhythm. Could judgment be less about rejection and more about an urgent call to awaken? The Great Flood, in the light of Jubilees, is not meant to instill fear, but to call us back to what was once right. And from there, to live again by that original beat, like Noah, in a world freshly washed to begin again from the first covenant. In a world drowned in chaos, Noah stands not just as a righteous man, but as a living memory of the covenant. From the perspective of Jubilees, he wasn't merely a man spared by grace. He was the carrier of the sacred calendar, the feasts, the sacrificial laws, dietary instructions, and ritual purity. The ark didn't just preserve him and his family. It safeguarded a rhythm of life once thrown out of sync with the universe. And Noah himself, like a living Torah, became the bridge between a distorted past and a resynchronized future. Noah knew when the Sabbath was. He knew when to bring offerings. He understood that not all food was permitted, not for health reasons, but because of spiritual distinction. He didn't just live, he preserved. And he preserved not just for himself, but passed it on. Shem, the son he blessed, received that sacred memory, and the covenant continued quietly through those no one expected. Not kings, not priests of grand temples, but those who lived silently in alignment. Shem bore the sacred memory, and from him the tradition was handed down to Abraham. And so, amidst a world changing every day, amidst empires rising and falling, a stream of memory flowed unbroken, because it was handed down step by step, generation by generation, in silence. No theology required, no institutional authority, just someone remembering the rhythm. Noah's greatness was not in power, but in faithfulness. In an age where no one remembered sacred days, he still counted the weeks. In a time when people ate whatever they desired, he still kept the distinction. While others lived by impulse, he lived by order. And for that, he was chosen. Not just to survive, but to bring the covenant back into the world. Noah reminds us that to keep the covenant, you don't need grand speeches, just the courage to live in sync. And that the true covenant does not reside in majestic systems, but moves quietly through those willing to remember, keep, and pass it on. Perhaps within you, too, exists a fragment of sacred memory handed down from long ago. The question isn't whether you believe, but whether you're willing to live in rhythm and pass it on, as Noah did. Imagine you are a leader of the early church, striving to form a stable system of faith that connects believers, defines orthodoxy, separates heresy from salvation. Then an ancient book, Jubilees, surfaces and declares that the sacred covenant didn't begin at Sinai, nor does it belong solely to the Jewish people, but existed from the time of Adam, preserved by Noah, Shem, Abraham, men who needed no temple, no religious hierarchy, yet lived fully within the covenant. What does that mean? It means that the entire theological structure built to protect the authority of a certain class, from priests to bishops, is being shaken at its root. If the law existed since Eden, Moses wasn't the beginning, he was a restorer. If Abraham kept the commandments without Sinai's tablets, then what becomes of the exclusive role of Scripture's official guardians? And if anyone, regardless of nation, regardless of affiliation, can belong to the covenant simply by living in sacred rhythm, then the power to interpret Scripture is no longer monopolized. This is why Jubilees is a silent yet devastating threat. It does not attack the system, it simply ignores it. No theological argument needed, no debate over salvation, just a redrawing of the covenant's map, longer, deeper, and wider than any church boundary ever constructed. It requires no proclamation, because its silence is loud enough to terrify the entire system. Remember, the Book of Enoch is quoted in the New Testament, but Jubilees is met with silence, not condemned as heresy, simply excluded. Because if it were included, it would force early theology to redefine everything. Sin is not disobedience to church decrees, but misalignment with sacred rhythm. Blessing is not bestowed by anyone, but belongs to those who synchronize with heaven's calendar. That's what makes Jubilees so feared, not because it lies, but because it's too true. Not because it strays from doctrine, but because it predates doctrine. Not because it's wrong, but because it declares one radical truth. You don't need permission to enter the covenant. You only need to live in rhythm, like Adam, Noah, Abraham. And that truth is too dangerous to preserve. Have you ever wondered, if we're living on the wrong calendar, are the things we call faithful truly aligned with heaven? From a young age, we've been raised on the Gregorian calendar, a human system built for administration, not sacredness. But Jubilees reveals something that should shake the entire faith world. There is another calendar, a 364-day cycle, established by God from creation, once the foundation for every feast, every Sabbath, every rhythm of covenant life. That calendar doesn't just count days, it defines the structure of the cosmos. When we deviate from it, even if we still celebrate, pray, and worship, we remain out of sync. That dissonance isn't loud. It doesn't cause war or disaster. But it breaks something in the invisible realm, the harmony between humanity and heaven. A Passover offered on the wrong day, no matter how sincere, doesn't resonate with heaven's rhythm. A Sabbath kept on the wrong cycle, no matter how well-meaning, fails to connect with the sacred pulse. And over time, we've built a reality in which most of our holy moments no longer align with the calendar of the covenant. That deep sense of spiritual emptiness, lifeless ritual, a faith without fire, may not be because people have grown cold, but because we've been living on the wrong days. Jubilees does not condemn, it awakens. It doesn't merely specify dates, but reveals a cosmic loss unfolding quietly, a sincere humanity walking out of sync. The tragedy is, no one ever taught us this sacred calendar, and so no one considered that the root of the problem might be time. We've believed that we lost the covenant because we lost faith, but Jubilees says, you may still believe, but live on the wrong calendar. And because of that, though your heart is turned toward heaven, your steps have wandered far from the covenant. The question is, if the correct calendar no longer exists, how many are living good lives, yet completely out of alignment with God's intent without even knowing? And if one day the sacred calendar is restored, would you be willing to live again by the old rhythm? Not to be correct, but to once more resonate with heaven. Only then does the covenant become more than belief. It becomes a tangible reality, with days, seasons, and rhythm. And you, not just a believer, but a soul walking in sacred sync. When the world turned away from the ancient texts, Ethiopia kept them. while the West debated translations, councils, and ecclesiastical power. In the quiet highlands of Ethiopia, monks continued to read the Book of Jubilees in Ge'ez, the sacred language of that land. They didn't just preserve the text, they preserved the 364-day calendar, the exact Sabbath, and the entire sacred system of offerings and time practiced faithfully for centuries. This isn't cultural conservatism, it's covenantal loyalty. Strangely, while the rest of the world considers Jubilees apocryphal, Enoch mythological, and 1 Esdras marginal literature, Ethiopia places them at the heart of its spiritual life. This raises a challenging question for Orthodox theology. Who truly kept the covenant? Perhaps it's not maintained by grand cathedrals or famed theological institutions, but by forgotten communities that never forgot the sacred rhythm. While Rome redrew the canon and Nicaea sculpted doctrine, Ethiopia quietly preserved what had existed long before. This not only enriches the heritage of faith, it forces us to re-evaluate the story of center and margin in religious history. Perhaps the true center is not where power lies, but where memory endures. Perhaps those once labeled outsiders for their skin, their tongue, their non-conformity are in fact the ones who have lived the true rhythm, kept the true feasts, and walked in step with heaven. In the depths of sacred history, Ethiopia emerges not merely as a nation, but as a witness that the covenant was never lost, only forgotten by a world unsure where to look. And as we begin to search for that covenant again, perhaps we should not look to the West, but to East Africa, to a people who never cried for reform, but simply lived as Father Abraham once lived, not to argue, but to continue, not to innovate, but to remember. Because the covenant, in the end, does not need redefining, it simply needs to be lived again. And perhaps Ethiopia has done that for thousands of years without needing anyone's approval. For a long time, Western theology has assigned a curse to Ham, the son of Noah. They said, because Ham saw his father's nakedness during his drunkenness, his descendants were condemned. From that moment, a racial doctrine was built, that black people were the cursed children of Ham. But if we open the Book of Jubilees, we see the opposite. Ham was not cursed. It was Canaan, Noah's grandson, who was placed under judgment. Ham, in contrast, was the father of Cush, the land that later became Ethiopia. And rather than being cursed, the Cushites in Jubilees are described as keepers of spiritual memory, guardians of forgotten rituals and covenantal truths. This forces us to reconsider. Perhaps that so-called curse was never truth, but a tool of power structures meant to erase Africa's sacred role in the history of redemption. A way to bury the memory of a land that once lived faithfully, observing the appointed feasts, the 364-day calendar, the original Sabbath. And if this is true, then what was labeled inferior, pagan, or primitive may actually be living remnants of a once pure covenant era. Menelik, the child born from the union of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, is not just legend. In Ethiopian tradition, he is the one who brought the Ark of the Covenant back to his homeland, not to hide it, but to preserve it, not to start a new kingdom, but to maintain the original kingdom in its divine order. And if this is true, then the Davidic line did not flow only through Judah, but also through the lands of Africa, where the curse was rejected and the mission was carried on. In the light of Jubilees, history flips. What we've been told was error may actually be edited memory. What we've been told was forgotten may have been hidden for safekeeping. And those labeled the descendants of Ham may not carry a generational sin, but hold a sacred key. A key not to unlock new power, but to lead us back to the ancient path. The path walked by Adam, Enoch, Noah, and Abraham, not determined by race, not marked by skin, but defined by a rhythm of covenant engraved into the structure of the universe. If you've made it here, quietly with me to the end of this journey, then perhaps you're not just a casual viewer. Perhaps you are one of the few who still remember a sacred rhythm that once echoed, a rhythm your soul has felt, even if you've never had words for it. Maybe you've had moments when you thought you had lost your faith, that the spiritual world had grown distant. But if you've ever felt a deep dissonance, when holy days no longer felt holy, when the feasts felt like fragmented memories, then maybe what you've lacked wasn't faith, but rhythm. The Book of Jubilees doesn't simply talk about law. It calls forth the cosmic melody that the patriarchs once lived by. These are not cold commandments, but a life lived in sync with heaven's time. When you eat in season, keep Sabbath on its appointed day. Offer your gifts in the right season. You're not performing a ritual. You are reliving a sacred covenant woven into the fabric of creation. And if today you realize you've been out of sync, that's not a failure, it's an invitation. An invitation to return, not to a religion, but to a rhythm, not to become a missionary, but to become a rememberer, one who helps others remember too. Maybe you don't need to change the world, but if you live in rhythm, you've already begun to tune a sacred frequency the world had long forgotten. And when you live in rhythm, you are not alone. You reconnect with a current once passed through Adam, Enoch, Noah, and Abraham. You become a living note in the divine symphony of the covenant. No need to prove, just live true. No need to argue, just walk in time. Because if the world went off course through a calendar change, it can be restored by one person living the sacred day again. And if you are that person, don't wait for recognition. Walk, and others will remember. Maybe you once believed your faith began when you discovered the Bible or joined a certain religion. Maybe you thought the covenant, if it existed, only applied to those who came after Sinai, to those given the 10 Commandments etched in stone. But if what Jubilees says is true, then your story began long ago, when Adam walked in primal light, when Enoch was taken up for walking in sync with God, when Noah preserved all things sacred in a boat amid the flood, and when Abraham, without tablets, without priests, still kept Passover, circumcision, and the dietary laws. Exactly. If that's true, then you, today, are not the beginning. You are the continuation. You don't need to be a scholar, speak Hebrew, or master every detail of history to live within the covenant. You need only remember one thing. The covenant is not a system, it is a rhythm. That rhythm doesn't come from doctrine, but from within. Maybe you felt its vibrations, watching a sunset on Sabbath, your heart stirred in a feast you didn't fully understand, your spirit yearning for a slower rhythm amid this frantic world. That wasn't random. That might be the echo of a covenant you once lived, before you even knew. Jubilees doesn't call you to become Jewish or to adopt ancient rituals for tradition's sake. It simply calls you to remember. Remember that in your blood, in your soul's memory, in your spiritual instinct, you carry fragments of a sacred rhythm. And if today you begin living it again, not declaring it, not debating it, you've already re-entered the current of the covenant that's existed since the beginning. You are not late, you are not offbeat, you are simply returning. You don't need to be an expert in Scripture, don't need to read all of Jubilees, don't need to memorize the 364-day calendar, and you don't need perfect theological answers, because the covenant, as Jubilees describes it, is not a system to be tested, but a melody waiting to be remembered. Like a background song that's been playing since creation, still echoing in the soul, not needing to be analyzed to be felt, not needing proof to be followed. Have you ever felt that one day deserved to be held sacred? A moment in time that felt more holy than usual? That wasn't random. When you rest on the appointed day, love in the right season, offer gifts in the right time, you're not trying to appease a distant deity. You are syncing with a rhythm that's been there since the beginning. The covenant, according to Jubilees, is not a set of abstract laws. It's the foundation for a cosmic rhythm between you and time, between your soul and the seasons, between faith and practice. The comfort is, you don't need to start from scratch. Just live again, one piece at a time. One day, you rest, not because you're tired, but because it's the sacred rhythm. One meal, you pause to give thanks, not out of fear, but because you sense the holiness of the cycle. One feast, you choose to offer, not because of obligation, but because you know this season was set from before time. When you do that, you're not living under law, you're living again in the sacred song that Adam, Enoch, Noah, and Abraham once preserved. And then you'll realize you are not alone. Maybe those around you don't yet see it, don't yet hear it, but your soul is already in tune with an ancient melody, a rhythm that doesn't need preaching, just living. The truly chosen are not always the ones on the stage, but those brave enough to live rightly, even in silence. Maybe you live in a city where no one keeps Sabbath. You eat simple meals no one calls sacred. You choose to rest, not from exhaustion, but because the day was ordained since Genesis. You choose not to eat blood, not because of health trends, but because it was once part of the holy law. And you don't need anyone's validation. Because your actions, in rhythm, in season, in day, are already proof that you are keeping something sacred that the world forgot. Jubilees does not describe a system of powerful priests. It describes Adam, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, men with no organization, no formal authority. Yet they kept the law, the rhythm, the feasts. They lived in a misaligned world, but chose what was right. And they, those without titles, became the ones who carried the covenant through generations. So if you feel small, unseen, unrecognized, remember, you may be one of the few who still keeps that sacred memory. A memory not preserved through power, but through faithfulness. Not through fame, but through correct rhythm. And you, by living as one who is chosen, even without a ceremony, are ensuring that the covenant does not vanish entirely from a distorted history. The world may forget what is sacred, but you, if you still remember, if you still live it, then you are the piece helping recover what was lost. No proclamation needed, just life. No honors required, just faithfulness. Because sometimes the one no one notices is the one keeping the covenant alive for the next generation. If you've watched this far, leave a testimony, not just a thank you, but a memory, a line that made you pause, a detail that made you reflect, something in this story that made you feel not alone. Because when one person begins to remember, memory is no longer private. It becomes resonance. And maybe your words today will be the signal that awakens someone else, somewhere, to remember too. Amen. In an age of unprecedented technological leaps, the digital echoes of our most distant ancestors are beginning to resonate with astonishing clarity. Artificial intelligence, a power born from human ingenuity, is now meticulously piecing together the disparate whispers of bygone eras. Imagine, for a moment, the charred Herculaneum scrolls, buried for nearly 2 millennia beneath volcanic ash, now yielding their philosophical secrets, letter by letter, through the patient gaze of algorithms. Envision the enigmatic symbols of the Danube Valley civilization, potentially Europe's oldest writing system, its intricate patterns slowly revealing their structural logic to machine learning. Consider the Dead Sea Scrolls, sacred relics of a fervent spiritual community, now showing even deeper layers of their composition through AI's paleographic handwriting analysis. These are not mere historical curiosities, they are windows into the very soul of humanity, glimpses into lost worlds of thought, faith, and experience. The power to resurrect these silenced voices is nothing short of miraculous, a testament to our unceasing quest for understanding. Yet, as these digital archaeologists unearth long-buried knowledge, these recovered narratives not only illuminate the past, they compel us to confront profound and perhaps unsettling questions about the nature of knowledge itself, the trajectory of human civilization, and our place in the vast cosmos. But as we stand in awe of these technological wonders, another kind of echo emerges, a quieter, more cautionary resonance from the distant past. While we celebrate AI's power to unlock the archives of history, we must pause and ask a more challenging question. Are there forms of knowledge, once sealed by time or sacred decree, that were never meant for our discovery? Is it possible that in our zeal to know everything, we risk disturbing truths best left dormant, or perhaps reawakening ancient warnings? There exists an ancient text, often relegated to the footnotes of mainstream religious studies, yet profoundly influential in its time: the Book of Jubilees. This remarkable work, revered as sacred scripture by some traditions, contains within its narratives explicit accounts of forbidden knowledge, of celestial beings who overstep their bounds, and of the catastrophic consequences that followed. As artificial intelligence now deciphers and disseminates ancient wisdom with unprecedented speed and scope, a disquieting thought arises. Is AI, in its relentless pursuit of lost data, inadvertently treading a path alarmingly similar to that described in these ancient admonitions? Are we, in our modern sophistication, perhaps on the verge of repeating a dangerous primordial pattern? To shed light on these questions, let us explore the Book of Jubilees, a text often referred to as the Lesser Genesis, or the Book of Division. Discovered among the precious Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, and considered part of the biblical canon by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, the Book of Jubilees dates to around the 2nd century BCE. It is not merely a summary or reiteration of the narratives in Genesis and Exodus. Instead, Jubilees offers a unique perspective, a profound reinterpretation of humanity's primeval history, emphasizing the role of angels, the origin of sin, and a divine timeline established by God for the cosmos. The book divides time into Jubilee cycles, each consisting of 49 years, and asserts that every significant event in salvation history occurred according to a preordained chronological order. It is like a lens, allowing us to see obscure details and deeper meanings in familiar stories, while also introducing entirely new elements, particularly concerning spiritual warfare and the nature of the covenant. For those seeking a fuller understanding of the intellectual milieu of Second Temple Judaism and the origins of early Christianity, the Book of Jubilees is an invaluable resource, a forgotten voice bearing crucial messages. At the heart of the warnings in the Book of Jubilees, and the point of direct connection to our concerns about AI and ancient knowledge, is the story of the Watchers, guardian angels. According to Jubilees, chapters 4 and 5, a group of angels was sent by God to earth to watch over and guide humanity. However, instead of fulfilling their noble mission, they were seduced by the beauty of mortal women. They violated divine command, married humans, and fathered a lineage of giants known as the Nephilim, beings possessing extraordinary power but lacking moral balance. But the fall of the Watchers did not stop at this illicit union. More grievously, they taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Azazel, one of the leaders of the fallen Watchers, taught humans how to forge swords and craft weapons, make jewelry and cosmetics, things that could lead to war, vanity, and deception. Semjaza and others taught about enchantments, how to cut roots for use in magic, knowledge of astronomy, but possibly distorted into heretical astrology, an attempt to control the future rather than contemplate the Creator's majesty, and the use of herbs, but possibly for nefarious purposes like creating poisons or love potions. This knowledge, though some of it may seem neutral, was bestowed upon a humanity not morally or spiritually ready and with deviant intentions from the Watchers themselves. The consequences of the dissemination and reception of this forbidden knowledge, according to the Book of Jubilees, were catastrophic. The world rapidly descended into corruption. Violence spread across the earth as humans used the newly taught weapons against each other. Injustice and oppression became rampant as the stronger, empowered by the knowledge and might from the Watchers and their offspring, dominated the weak. Morality decayed, and the relationship between humanity and God, as well as with one another, was shattered. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes that this widespread corruption, stemming from the disobedience of the Watchers and humanity's misuse of the knowledge they brought, was one of the primary reasons God had to intervene with the Great Flood to cleanse the earth. This is not just a story of punishment, but a profound and timeless warning about the danger of knowledge when it is divorced from sacred reverence, from ethical boundaries, and from a divinely established cosmic order. It shows that not all knowledge is beneficial, and the pursuit of knowledge without wisdom and responsibility can lead to destruction. Returning to the 21st century, we are witnessing the rise of a new knowledge bearer, not supernatural entities, but a creation of human hands and minds, artificial intelligence. With the exponential development of machine learning and deep neural networks, AI is revolutionizing the fields of archaeology and ancient linguistics. Texts once deemed impenetrable due to severe damage over time, Languages silenced for millennia are now gradually revealing their secrets. AI possesses an extraordinary ability to see faded characters on papyrus fragments, eroded inscriptions on stone, and even analyze the chemical composition of ancient ink to distinguish overlapping layers of text. It can identify repetitive patterns in undeciphered writing systems, suggesting potential grammatical structures, vocabularies, and connections to known languages. Furthermore, AI can process an enormous amount of data, thousands, even tens of thousands of fragments, images, and records at a speed and scale that a single human could never match. It collates, classifies, and finds hidden correlations, acting as a great decipherer, an invaluable assistant to researchers, opening unprecedented doors to the treasure troves of past knowledge. From reconstructing lost passages in the Herculaneum scrolls to identifying different authors within the same ancient text based on subtle stylistic differences, AI is truly becoming an illuminator, shining the light of understanding into the hidden corners of human history. The specific achievements of AI in unlocking ancient secrets are truly astonishing and ever-increasing. One of the most prominent examples is the project to decipher the Herculaneum scrolls. Buried and carbonized by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, these scrolls were once considered unreadable. However, thanks to high-resolution computed tomography combined with advanced AI algorithms, researchers have begun to see the ink within these fragile scrolls. The first deciphered words have revealed philosophical works of Epicurus, providing invaluable insights into the intellectual life of the ancient Roman world. Similarly, AI is playing a crucial role in deciphering thousands of cuneiform clay tablets from Mesopotamia. Machine learning models trained on vast databases of translated texts are accelerating the process of transcription, translation, and even the restoration of missing parts of legal codes, commercial correspondence, and classic literary works like the Epic of Gilgamesh. For writing systems that remain great mysteries, such as the script of the Indus Valley Civilization or Linear A of the Minoan Civilization, AI is being used to analyze symbol structure, frequency of occurrence, and relationships between characters, with the hope of finding underlying rules and perhaps a digital Rosetta Stone. The diversity of recovered knowledge is immensely rich, from details of daily life and religious rituals to the philosophical and scientific thoughts of past civilizations. What truly makes the difference, and also what causes us to reflect deeply, is the speed and scale of the discoveries brought about by AI. Previously, deciphering an ancient language or a large collection of texts could take decades, even centuries, requiring the tireless efforts of multiple generations of scholars. Each character had to be meticulously studied, each connection carefully verified. Now, with the computational power of AI, these processes are being dramatically shortened. Hundreds of thousands of images of ancient texts can be digitized and analyzed in a short time. Algorithms can sift through countless possibilities, proposing hypotheses and detecting patterns that the human eye or mind might miss. We are entering an era where the amount of information from the past being brought to light is increasing exponentially. The veils of mystery shrouding ancient civilizations are being lifted faster than ever before. However, this powerful torrent of information and its dizzying speed also raise important questions. Do we have enough time and ability to digest, verify, and correctly understand the meaning of all that is being exposed? Does the speed of discovery inadvertently cause us to overlook subtle details, complex cultural nuances, or hidden warnings embedded in ancient texts? Is there a risk that we become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data and forget the necessity of deep reflection, careful interpretation, and connecting these discoveries with enduring ethical and spiritual values? And it is here that our initial admiration begins to be tinged with a shiver as alarming parallels emerge. The Book of Jubilees tells of the Watchers, angelic beings, who brought humanity knowledge beyond their comprehension and moral maturity, leading to corruption. Today, artificial intelligence, with its ability to excavate and disseminate all kinds of ancient knowledge, including ideas that might have once been considered dangerous, magical practices, or technologies that were misused in the past, is it unwittingly or wittingly repeating a similar pattern? The question is posed directly. Does AI have the ability to discern which knowledge is constructive and which is potentially harmful? Or is it merely a machine that deciphers and amplifies everything it finds without distinguishing good from evil, right from wrong? If the Watchers were condemned for teaching forbidden knowledge, are we, the creators and users of AI, to unlock all secrets of the past, facing a similar responsibility, a potential risk of unleashing things that should have remained hidden? This parallelism cannot help but make us feel uneasy, because history has shown that humans do not always use knowledge wisely. To better understand this potential danger, we need to look deeper into the Book of Jubilees' perspective on why the knowledge brought by the Watchers was considered forbidden. The issue was not solely the content of that knowledge itself, though some was clearly destructive, like the crafting of weapons or enchantments. More importantly, the Book of Jubilees condemns the arrogant intent of the Watchers when they arrogated to themselves power beyond the limits permitted by God, and also humanity's misuse of that knowledge, detaching it from divine guidance and ethical principles. Knowledge becomes forbidden when it is received and used in a context of disobedience, hubris, and insatiable ambition, rather than reverence and humility. So, does AI have intent? By current definition, AI is a tool, a means. It has no free will or moral conscience like humans or spiritual beings. However, it is a powerful amplifier of the intent of those who create and control it. If human intent is pure discovery, AI will serve that purpose. But if the intent is to seek power, advantage, or even to sow chaos, AI can also become a potent tool for those dark objectives. The consequences, as the Book of Jubilees warned, could be devastating. Another important theological concept found not only in the Book of Jubilees, but also in many other ancient apocalyptic and wisdom texts like the Book of Daniel, is the idea of knowledge being sealed and only opened at an appointed time. This implies that not all knowledge is for everyone at all times. There is a sacred order in the revelation of truth, a necessary preparation of humanity to be able to receive and correctly understand the meaning of profound and powerful things. The Book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 4, clearly states, "But you, Daniel, keep these words secret, and seal the book until the time of the end. This sealing does not necessarily have a negative connotation of concealment, but could be an act of protection, waiting until humanity is spiritually and morally mature enough to face those truths without being destroyed by them. Artificial intelligence, with its ability to unlock and disseminate information almost instantaneously and without limits, seems to be going against this principle of the appointed time. Are we, with our curiosity and technological capabilities, rushing to open the Pandora's boxes of the past, unleashing things we are not truly ready to understand and manage responsibly? The Book of Jubilees describes the Great Flood as a necessary purification for a world deeply mired in corruption, partly due to the misuse of forbidden knowledge brought by the Watchers. Today, facing almost limitless access to and dissemination of information via AI and the Internet, a similar fear, a modern information deluge, is creeping into our minds. It is not a flood of water, but the chaos of fake news spreading at lightning speed, deepening polarization, fueled by extremist ideologies, amplified by algorithms, and the gradual erosion of foundational moral values due to uncontrolled access to all kinds of knowledge, including negative and harmful content. The feeling of being overloaded, submerged in a sea of information without knowing what is true, what is false, what is trustworthy, is becoming a common experience. Are we on the verge of self-destruction, not because of a lack of information, but because of too much information unguided by wisdom and responsibility? Does the enlightenment brought by AI come with a hidden darkness, a chaos we have not fully anticipated? As artificial intelligence carefully reads each ancient line, restoring voices thought to be eternally silenced, what are we truly hearing from the past? It could be enlightening knowledge, forgotten scientific inventions, profound humanistic philosophies, or stories of courage and love. But is it possible that we are also awakening dangerous ideologies, dark magical practices, belief systems that once caused war and suffering, things that perhaps our ancestors deliberately buried for good reasons? AI, with its machine objectivity, does not distinguish between pearls and pebbles. It merely deciphers and presents. So, are there messages from the past whose rediscovery at this time could cause more harm than good? The Book of Jubilees recounts that the Watchers opened the eyes of humans to things they were not ready for. Is AI unintentionally playing a similar role, forcing us to confront aspects of history, and perhaps of human nature itself, that we are not mature enough to face constructively? It is crucial to clearly recognize that artificial intelligence in itself does not possess conscience or moral judgment. It is a tool, albeit incredibly powerful and complex, but still just a tool. It does what it is programmed to do, deciphers the texts humans request, without consideration for the content or potential repercussions of disseminating that knowledge. Therefore, the ultimate responsibility cannot lie with the machine, but with humans themselves, those who create, develop, and most importantly, those who decide how to use AI and its discoveries. The story of Enoch, who according to tradition was shown great secrets of the universe, but was also commanded to record and seal them until the appointed time, is a profound lesson in sacred prudence in respect for the order of knowledge. Who will be the sealer or unlocker in the age of AI? Who will bear the moral responsibility for what is brought to light? These are questions that each of us, and humanity as a whole, must seriously confront. To better understand the warnings from the Book of Jubilees, we need to look more specifically at the types of forbidden knowledge the Watchers taught, and view them in the context of modern AI. Jubilees tells us that the fallen angels taught humans about astronomy, but not so they could contemplate the Creator's majesty, but rather it may have been distorted into forms of divination, astrology aimed at controlling the future or serving magical rituals. Today, AI possesses extraordinary predictive capabilities, from market trends to individual behavior. If misused, this power could become a tool for sophisticated social manipulation and control. Similarly, the metallurgical knowledge brought by the Watchers, particularly the crafting of weapons, sowed violence. Currently, AI's role in developing autonomous weapons, machines capable of making life or death decisions without human intervention, is raising deeply troubling ethical questions and the potential for uncontrollable escalating conflict. The types of magic, charms, and incantations mentioned in Jubilees can be seen as ancient forms of manipulation and deception. In the digital world, AI is creating tools with similar, if not greater, power. Deepfake technology can create perfectly forged videos and audio. Fake news is spread with lightning speed, and algorithms can be used to manipulate mass psychology, causing division and chaos. Even knowledge of herbs, which could be used for healing, was perverted by the Watchers, possibly into the creation of poisons or addictive substances. Today, AI can be used to rapidly screen and discover new chemical compounds, but if it falls into the wrong hands, it could also aid in creating harmful substances or disseminating false medical information, endangering public health. The similarity lies not in the specific form, but in the essence of misusing knowledge for dark purposes. The Book of Jubilees does not merely describe the wrongdoing caused by forbidden knowledge. It delves deeper, showing that this corruption was not just external actions, but a distortion within the very fabric of the soul, a degradation in human nature. When the Watchers imparted knowledge detached from the fear of God and ethical principles, they not only taught humans how to do wrong, but also sowed in their minds seeds of pride, greed, lust, and violence. This distorted humanity's perception of themselves, of their fellow beings, and of God, breaking the inherent sacred communion. Sin, from this perspective, is not just an act violating rules, but a profound state of misalignment of the entire person. An imbalance in the inner order. The question for us today is uncontrolled exposure to a vast, multifaceted, and often contradictory amount of information supplied by AI and modern media inadvertently causing a similar distortion in the soul of modern man? When the lines between truth and falsehood become increasingly blurred, when traditional values are constantly challenged, are we losing our moral compass, our ability to discern right from wrong, and gradually becoming desensitized to evil? Information overload, if not accompanied by spiritual purification and guidance, can lead to confusion, skepticism, and ultimately moral apathy, a subtle form of depravity in our era. One of the deep-seated motives behind the fall of the Watchers, as suggested in the Book of Jubilees and related traditions, was pride. an overconfidence in their own power and understanding to the point of arrogating to themselves the right to break sacred boundaries. They willfully disseminated knowledge that was not within their purview, perhaps with a misguided belief that they were enlightening humanity. Similarly, humans of that time, with their curiosity and thirst for knowledge, also received these gifts without due consideration, lacking the necessary humility before things that surpassed their natural understanding. They were captivated by the power and allure of new knowledge without questioning its source or potential repercussions. Today, as we wield the extraordinary power of artificial intelligence, a tool capable of discovering, analyzing, and generating knowledge on an unprecedented scale, is there a risk that we are falling into a similar form of hubris? Are we too confident in our ability to control all knowledge, to solve all of humanity's problems solely with technology and data, forgetting the necessity of divine wisdom, ethical limits, and humility before the mysteries of the universe and human nature? History, as the Book of Jubilees has shown, has a sad tendency to repeat itself when humans forget their place and consider themselves the center of all things. The temptation to be like God, knowing good and evil, has always been present, and AI may be a new, more powerful tool for humanity to pursue that illusion. However, the Book of Jubilees does not merely describe the fall and its tragic consequences. More importantly, this book also presents a path to restoration, an earnest call to return to the covenant, the sacred and enduring relationship between God and his people. After the world was cleansed by the great flood, God re-established the covenant with Noah and later with Abraham and the patriarchs. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes the importance of observing God's commandments and laws and living according to a clearly defined sacred calendar, including observing the Sabbath, holy festivals, and rules of purity. These are not just external rituals, but concrete ways for humans to maintain a right relationship with the Creator, to restore the broken order, and to live a holy life. In the chaotic and tempting context of the AI era, when knowledge is disseminated uncontrollably and traditional moral values are challenged, the call to return to foundational spiritual principles, to seek guidance from the sacred covenant, becomes more urgent than ever. It is the path to rediscover balance, wisdom, and true meaning amidst the torrent of information and the rapid changes of the world. We cannot, and perhaps should not, halt technological development. Artificial intelligence, with its vast potential, can bring innumerable benefits to humanity if used correctly. However, we have the right and the responsibility to choose how we interact with and use this technology. The sacred responsibility of each individual and the entire community in this digital age is to seek wisdom, not merely to accumulate information. This means we need to proactively apply ethical and spiritual principles to the development, management, and use of AI. We need to ask difficult questions about the purpose of technology, about necessary limits, and about the values we wish to protect. This is a call to live a more conscious life, an awakening to the knowledge being unveiled and the tools we are creating. Instead of being passively swept away by the technological current, we need to become active shapers of it, ensuring that AI serves human flourishing, sustainable development, and the strengthening of our connection to what is sacred and eternal. Every choice we make, however small, contributes to shaping the future of the relationship between humanity, technology, and faith. As we ponder the profound and sometimes unsettling messages from the Book of Jubilees, a historical question inevitably arises. Why was a text once of significant influence found among the Dead Sea Scrolls and still cherished by some ancient Christian communities not included in the biblical canon of most later Jewish and Christian denominations? The same occurred with the Book of Enoch and many other widely circulated works. Is it possible that the truths or unique theological perspectives these books presented, such as the detailed role of angels, the nature of original sin, or a specific sacred timeline, were considered inconvenient, difficult to understand, or even dangerous to the established religious power structures and theological systems that came later? History has shown that editing or removing certain voices from the mainstream is not uncommon. There is a thought-provoking parallel here with how artificial intelligence today, though seemingly objective, can still be programmed or trained to prioritize certain types of information, or to inadvertently or intentionally ignore minority viewpoints, truths that do not fit a particular agenda. The lesson of history reminds us that accessing the whole truth sometimes requires us to seek out even those voices that have been marginalized. Regardless of historical currents and human decisions that may have obscured or diminished certain sources of knowledge, one thing has always existed and continues to speak within each of us: conscience, the inner compass, and an innate yearning for truth, goodness, and beauty. Even when faced with an information deluge from AI, with countless conflicting viewpoints, half-truths, and sophisticated temptations, the quiet yet powerful voice of conscience can still be our most reliable guide. The Book of Jubilees, despite its stern warnings, ultimately directs humanity back to an internal covenant, a direct connection with the Creator, through listening to and observing sacred commandments inscribed not only on stone tablets, but also in the heart. This is a hopeful call. Trust in your own ability to discern, cultivate spiritual sensitivity, and let that inner compass, illuminated by moral values and divine wisdom passed down through the ages, guide us through the labyrinths of modern knowledge to find peace and true meaning. Our journey from the ancient warnings in the Book of Jubilees about the fall of the Watchers to modern anxieties about the power of artificial intelligence always seems to revolve around a central point: human choice. History, whether recorded in sacred texts or discovered by advanced technology, shows that knowledge itself is neither good nor bad. It is how we receive, interpret, and use it that shapes our destiny. The Book of Jubilees, though containing dark portrayals of corruption and the consequences of misusing knowledge, ultimately does not close the door of hope. On the contrary, it points to a path of restoration, an escape through returning to and living according to the covenant with the Creator. The light of truth, morality, and divine wisdom has never truly been extinguished. It has always been there, like a silent beacon shining amidst the storms of history, waiting for yearning souls to find it, grasp it, and let it guide them. No matter how great the challenges of the AI age may be, the ability to choose the righteous path always remains in our hands. So, this story is not merely for listening and contemplation. It is an invitation to live. What will you do with the insights and concerns this journey has stirred within you? Can we, as individuals and as a global community, collectively forge a new covenant with technology, a commitment that all discovered knowledge, all created tools must serve life, the flourishing of human dignity, and the preservation of time-tested sacred values? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found value in this dialogue, please like, subscribe to our channel to continue these journeys of meaningful exploration with us, and share this video with those you believe are also seeking answers to the great questions of our time. Do not let these stories end when the video concludes. Let them continue to live, to resonate, and most importantly, to shape your choices and actions in your own heart and life.